What if the most dangerous material on Earth just disappeared? Not stolen, not destroyed, just gone somewhere underground, and nobody, not even the world's top nuclear inspectors, can say exactly where. If that sentence made your stomach turn a little, good. Because before you keep watching, hit that like button right now, not for me, but as a signal to the algorithm that this story deserves to reach more people. Subscribe if you want to understand how the world's most dangerous secrets actually unfold. And if you know someone who still thinks nuclear tension is a thing of the past, send them this video. They need to see it. Now let's go back to where this really starts. For decades, Iran insisted its nuclear program was peaceful. Power plants, medical research, energy independence. That was the official story, repeated in press conferences, repeated in state media, repeated so often that many people simply stopped questioning it. But underneath that story, something else was happening. Deep inside mountains, behind blast doors, protected by layers of rock designed to survive an actual war, Iran was spinning centrifuges, thousands of them. Machines that take raw uranium and slowly, patiently turn it into something far more powerful than fuel for a power plant. Uranium enrichment is measured in percentages. Enrich it to around 3 to 5%, and you get fuel for a civilian power plant. Enrich it to 20%, and you're most of the way toward weapons-capable material. Enrich it past 60%, and you're standing right at the edge of what separates a peaceful nuclear program from something that could end a city. By the middle of this decade, Iran had crossed that line. Not once. Not in some small experimental batch. Inspectors confirmed hundreds of kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% sitting inside Iranian facilities. That number matters more than almost any other number in this entire story, because 60% enriched uranium is only a short technical step away from weapons-grade material. Experts estimated it could fuel not one, but multiple nuclear devices if pushed that final distance. Let that sink in. This wasn't a country debating whether to start a nuclear weapons program someday. This was a country that had already built the machinery, already produced the material, and was sitting one decision away from crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed. For years, the world watched this unfold through inspection reports and diplomatic statements. There was a nuclear agreement once, signed years earlier, meant to cap Iran's enrichment level, limit its stockpile, and keep international inspectors watching around the clock, day and night, with cameras running, inside the most sensitive rooms. Under that agreement, Iran was allowed to keep only a small amount of low-enriched uranium, and the timeline experts calculated for Iran to reach enough weapons-grade material for even a single bomb stretched out to roughly a year. That single number, 1 year, was the entire point of the agreement. It was meant to buy the world time to notice, time to react, time to stop things before they went too far. But that agreement didn't survive. One side pulled out, trust broke down on every level, and once the restrictions fell away, Iran didn't slow down, it expanded. More centrifuges, higher enrichment levels, bigger stockpiles. The 1 year buffer the world once relied on began shrinking month after month, year after year, until analysts stopped talking about a year and started talking about weeks. Some assessments, in the final stretch before the strikes, suggested Iran could theoretically produce enough weapons-grade material for a bomb in a matter of days if it made the political decision to do so. Not the finished weapon itself, that still requires additional engineering, but the core ingredient, the part that used to take a year to produce, had become almost immediate. That's the backdrop nobody can afford to ignore. This wasn't a slow, sleepy standoff. It was a countdown that kept accelerating year after year, while the rest of the world argued about what to do next. Then came the moment everything changed. In June, after months of rising tension, Israel launched a military campaign targeting Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure. Strikes hit the above-ground enrichment plant at Natanz. Explosions tore through power systems, backup generators, and the electrical infrastructure that kept the centrifuges spinning. Within days, that facility was no longer operational. But Natanz wasn't the real prize. The real prize was buried under a mountain, Fordow, a facility so deep underground that ordinary bombs couldn't reach it. Iran built it that way on purpose, learning from history, learning from every previous strike anywhere in the world on nuclear infrastructure. Fordow was designed to survive almost anything. It housed thousands of centrifuges, protected by hundreds of feet of solid rock. Israel didn't have the weapons to crack it open. Only one country did, the United States. Within days of Israel's opening strikes, American B-2 stealth bombers took off and flew halfway around the world. Their target? Fordow. Their weapon? Massive bunker. Buster bombs built specifically to punch through mountains and detonate deep underground, exactly where Iran's most protected enrichment hall was hiding. At the same time, American submarines fired cruise missiles at a third site, Isfahan, a sprawling nuclear technology complex believed to be storing a large portion of Iran's most dangerous material. In a matter of hours, 3 of Iran's most critical nuclear sites were hit simultaneously: Natanz, Fordow, Isfahan. The 3 pillars of Iran's nuclear ambitions struck almost at once. American officials called it a devastating blow, one that would set Iran's nuclear timeline back by years. The White House went even further, saying the strikes on Fordow had rendered the facility completely inoperable, and that if Iran could not regain access to enriched material, the damage done to its weapons ambitions could last indefinitely. That's a bold claim, and it came with a hidden condition tucked right inside it. If Iran does not gain access to nuclear material, that single word "if" carries the entire weight of everything that comes next in this story. Satellite images taken in the days after the strikes showed collapsed structures, blocked roads, destroyed power infrastructure, and almost zero visible activity at any of the 3 sites. Transformers that once powered thousands of centrifuges sat in ruins. Roads leading toward the tunnel entrances at Fordow were left cratered and impassable. For the first time in years, it genuinely looked, from the outside at least, like Iran's nuclear engine had been stopped cold. But here's where the story stops being simple. Here's where it turns into a mystery that, even now, nobody has fully solved. Because bombing a building doesn't automatically destroy what was inside it. And in this case, what was inside those buildings wasn't just machinery, it was material. Hundreds of kilograms of highly enriched uranium. And uranium, unlike a centrifuge bolted to a concrete floor, can be moved. Before we go further into what might be the most unsettling part of this entire story, let's pause. If you've made it this far, you already understand this isn't just political noise. It's a genuine puzzle with global stakes. So do one small thing right now, tap subscribe, then drop a single word in the comments describing how this story makes you feel. Curious? Uneasy? I read those comments and I want to know. Now, back to the mystery. In the days before the American strikes, satellite images captured something strange near Fordow and Isfahan. Trucks, rows of them, lined up outside the tunnel entrances, days before the bombs ever fell. Analysts studying those images noticed something else, too. Sealed containers being loaded and moved, the kind of movement you'd expect if someone knew an attack was coming and wanted to save what mattered most before it arrived. Intelligence assessments later suggested exactly that. An unknown amount of highly enriched uranium may have been moved out of Fordow before the American strikes ever hit. Not all of it, experts believe. Some material likely stayed behind, buried under rubble, possibly damaged, possibly not. But some of it, potentially a large portion of Iran's most dangerous stockpile, may have already been somewhere else when the bombs landed. Where exactly? That's the question that still doesn't have a clean answer. The United Nations nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, tried to piece it together using satellite images and Iran's own declarations. But there was a problem. Months before the strikes, Iran had turned off the monitoring cameras installed at its nuclear sites. Those cameras were supposed to give inspectors constant, unbroken visibility into exactly how much material existed and where it moved. Once they went dark, that visibility vanished with them. Inspectors call this losing continuity of knowledge. It sounds like a bureaucratic phrase, but its meaning is chilling. It means that from a certain point forward, nobody outside Iran can say with certainty exactly how much enriched uranium exists, or exactly where it's sitting right now. Not the United Nations, not American intelligence, not Israeli intelligence. The last confirmed, verified count is now old information, and everything since then is estimation, satellite guesswork, and educated assumption. Now think about what that actually means. A stockpile of material, enough by some estimates to fuel multiple nuclear weapons if enriched the rest of the way, and the world's monitoring system essentially went blind right before the material may have been moved. Some analysts believe a significant portion ended up at Isfahan, tucked into tunnel complexes built into a mountain ridge. Now, satellite images months after the strikes appeared to show unusual activity there. Vehicles moving sealed barrel-like containers into the tunnel entrance, the kind of movement that looks a lot like material being stored, not destroyed. Other experts aren't so sure. They point out Iran has other tunnel systems too, some older, some newly under construction, including a facility being built deep inside a mountain near Natanz that analysts have nicknamed, almost like something out of a spy film, Pickaxe Mountain. Construction there didn't stop after the strikes. If anything, satellite imagery suggests it continued, month after month, quietly, without any dramatic announcement, almost as if Iran wanted the world distracted by the visible destruction elsewhere, while a new hiding place kept growing underground. There's also the question of timing. Investigators point out that there were roughly 8 days between Israel's very first strikes and the moment American bombers finally hit Fordow. 8 days is not a lot of time to rebuild a destroyed facility, But it is more than enough time to move sealed containers out of a mountain, especially if the people moving them had been planning for exactly this scenario for years. Whether Iran actually used that window to relocate its most dangerous material is still debated. But the window existed, and once a window like that exists, certainty walks right out through it. So here is the uncomfortable truth, sitting underneath all of this. The United States delivered one of the most technically difficult and geopolitically significant military strikes in recent history. Stealth bombers, submarine-launched missiles, coordinated timing across 3 separate locations, hundreds of miles apart. On paper, and in terms of physical infrastructure, it worked. Enrichment halted, centrifuges destroyed, power systems wiped out. Iran's ability to enrich uranium at industrial scale, gone, at least for now. But the material itself, the actual enriched uranium that took years and enormous resources to produce, may still exist. Somewhere. Protected, hidden, or simply unaccounted for. This is the part that separates military victory from strategic certainty. You can destroy a factory. Rebuilding a factory takes years. Specialized equipment, rare materials, technical expertise that isn't easy to replace overnight. But you cannot destroy something you cannot find. And right now, according to the very inspectors whose job it is to track this material, nobody can say for certain how much of Iran's most dangerous uranium still exists, or where it's being kept. Let's talk about why this matters beyond the headlines. Because this isn't just a story about bombs and buildings. It's a story about the terrifying gap between what a country can build and what the rest of the world can actually verify. For years, international nuclear agreements relied on trust layered with verification, inspectors visiting sites, cameras running around the clock, detailed paperwork tracking every gram of enriched material. That system isn't perfect, but it works when everyone cooperates. The moment a country turns off the cameras, expels inspectors, or stops answering questions honestly, that entire verification system collapses, and the world is left relying on satellites, informants, and educated guesses instead of hard facts. That's exactly the position the world finds itself in right now with Iran. Officials from Washington to Tel Aviv to Vienna are being incredibly careful with their language because nobody wants to make a claim they can't back up. Some say the strikes set Iran's program back by years, maybe even permanently, if Iran never regains access to that material. Others warn that if even a fraction of that highly enriched uranium survived and remains hidden, Iran could theoretically still be closer to a weapon than most people realize, especially since experts warn that determining an exact timeline right now, given all these unknowns, is nearly impossible. Even the head of the IAEA, the man whose entire job is to track this material, has had to rely on public interviews rather than confirmed physical inspections to describe where the missing uranium might be. Think about that for a second. The single most qualified person on the planet to answer this question is essentially guessing in public, using satellite evidence and secondhand intelligence, because Iran won't let him walk into the room and count it himself. When the person in charge of verification is reduced to educated speculation, you know the situation has moved from monitored to something far closer to unknown. And here's a detail that rarely gets the attention it deserves. Iran doesn't just have that dangerous 60% material to worry the world. Before the strikes, inspectors had also confirmed hundreds of kilograms of uranium enriched to 20% and thousands of kilograms enriched to lower levels, some around 5%, some barely above natural uranium. On its own, that lower-level material sounds far less alarming. But experts are quick to point out that once uranium reaches 20%, most of the technical difficulty of enrichment is already behind you. Getting from 20% to 90%, true weapons grade, takes far less additional work than getting from natural uranium up to 20% in the first place. In other words, the hardest, slowest, most resource-heavy part of the entire process was already finished long before the strikes ever happened. That's why analysts describe Iran's overall stockpile, taken together across every enrichment level, as sufficient in theory to eventually fuel several nuclear devices. Not just one, if enough of it survived, and if Iran ever rebuilt the capability to finish the job. The strikes destroyed the machinery needed to do that final push at the 2 main sites. But machinery, unlike raw material that's already been painstakingly refined, can theoretically be rebuilt, especially if any hidden production capacity survived the attack or exists somewhere the world doesn't yet know about. This is the uncomfortable reality behind a headline that sounded, on the day it happened, like a clean, decisive victory. 3 sites hit, program crippled, mission accomplished. But underground, in tunnels human eyes can't see into and satellites can only guess about, the real story is still unfolding. If this is the kind of story you want more of, stories that go past the headlines and into the details almost nobody explains clearly, this is exactly why subscribing matters. Every subscriber tells me to keep digging into stories like this instead of settling for surface-level coverage. So if you've made it this far, you already know this channel is worth sticking around for. Hit that button, and let's keep going, because the most important question hasn't been answered yet. What happens next? If this is the kind of story you want more of, stories that go past the headlines and into the details almost nobody explains clearly, this is exactly why subscribing matters. Every subscriber tells me to keep digging into stories like this instead of settling for surface level coverage. So if you've made it this far, you already know this channel is worth sticking around for. Hit that button, and let's keep going, because the most important question hasn't been answered yet. What happens next? No, this channel is worth sticking around for. Hit that button, and let's keep going, because the most important question hasn't been answered yet. What happens next? Untouched by the strikes, that changes the entire math. Because the hardest part of building a nuclear weapon isn't the final technical steps. It's producing the enriched material in the first place. That process takes the most time, the most infrastructure, and the most resources to hide from the outside world. If that hardest part is already done, and the material already exists somewhere safe, everything that comes after becomes dramatically faster. This is exactly why inspectors, analysts, and intelligence officials across multiple countries are treating this as an unfinished story rather than a closed case. Iran has expelled some international inspectors and restricted access for others, making it even harder to get an accurate picture. Satellite images can show trucks and construction, but they cannot show what's inside a sealed container or confirm what lies deep inside a mountain tunnel that nobody outside Iran has physically walked into. Some analysts have tried to estimate this using indirect clues instead, things like radiation readings, ventilation patterns, or even the way vehicles move around a site day to day. None of these methods can replace a physical inspection. They can only narrow the range of guesses, turning a complete unknown into, at best, an educated one. And in a situation this serious, the difference between we don't know and we have a rough idea still leaves an enormous amount of room for something to go unnoticed. There's also a broader lesson buried inside this entire situation, one that goes beyond Iran and touches every country watching this unfold. For years, some nations assumed that physical distance and buried infrastructure meant safety, that if something is deep enough underground, protected by enough rock, it becomes untouchable. The strikes on Fordow proved that assumption wrong. If a country like the United States decides to act and possesses the specific weapons capable of reaching deeply buried targets, no facility is truly safe from destruction. But the flip side of that lesson is just as important. Destroying a facility doesn't automatically destroy what's inside it. Bombs are extremely good at collapsing tunnels, breaking machinery, and cutting off power. They are far less reliable at guaranteeing the destruction of a small, sealed container of material that could have been moved days earlier and quietly tucked away somewhere entirely different. This is the paradox sitting at the heart of the entire Iran nuclear situation. Overwhelming military power, deployed with precision, timing, and coordination that most militaries in the world simply couldn't replicate. And yet, even that overwhelming power couldn't guarantee complete certainty. It couldn't answer the one question that matters most. Where is the uranium now? It's a strange kind of modern warfare, one where the most advanced weapons on the planet can be used with pinpoint accuracy, striking exact coordinates from thousands of miles away, and still leave the central question completely open. In older wars, victory was often visible. Territory captured, cities held, armies defeated in the open. This is different. This is a war fought partly in tunnels nobody can see into, and partly in ambiguity itself, where success is measured not just in what was destroyed, but in how confidently anyone can say what wasn't. Some officials remain confident. They point to the scale of destruction, the confirmed halt in enrichment activity, and the years it would take to rebuild industrial-scale centrifuge capacity, arguing that even if some material survived, Iran's path to an actual usable weapon remains distant and difficult. Others remain far more cautious, pointing to Iran's history of hiding facilities from the world for years at a time, sometimes only discovered when intelligence agencies stumbled onto them almost by accident. If Iran hid an entire enrichment facility once before, they argue, hiding a stockpile of material inside an already existing tunnel system is far from impossible, and that's the tension that makes this story so gripping and honestly so unsettling. It isn't a story with a clean ending. It's a story that shifts depending on information that may not become clear for months or even years, if it ever becomes fully clear at all. Every satellite image adds a piece. Every inspection report adds a piece. But right now, nobody, absolutely nobody, has the complete picture. Think about what that really means for a moment. In an era where satellites can photograph a car from orbit, where intelligence agencies have technology that sounds like something some analysts have tried to estimate the location of some of the most dangerous material on the planet remains, radiation readings, at least partially, unknown. Not because nobody's looking, because the people hiding it know exactly how to stay ahead of the people searching. Satellite image adds a piece. Every inspection report adds a piece. But right now, nobody, absolutely nobody, has the complete picture. If Iran hid an entire enrichment facility once before, they argue, hiding a stockpile of material inside an already existing tunnel system is far from impossible. And that's the tension that makes this story so gripping and honestly so unsettling. It isn't a story with a clean ending. It's a story that shifts depending on information that may not become clear for months or even noticing. Hiding a stockpile of material inside a tunnel system that already exists becomes, by comparison, a much simpler task. And that history matters here because it shapes how seriously intelligence agencies are treating every unanswered question in this story. Nobody wants to repeat the mistake of assuming a program is finished simply because its most visible buildings were destroyed. The lesson learned, again and again, is that the absence of visible activity is not the same thing as the absence of danger, partially unknown. Not because nobody is looking, because the people hiding it know exactly how to stay ahead. Satellite image adds a piece. Every inspection report adds a piece. But right now, nobody, absolutely nobody, has the complete picture. Think about what that really means for a moment. In an era where satellites can photograph a car from orbit, where intelligence agencies have technology that sounds like something out of science fiction, the location of some of the most dangerous material on the planet remains, at least. So where does that leave us? Iran's nuclear program, once one of the most advanced and closely watched programs on Earth, now sits in a strange kind of limbo. Its most visible infrastructure destroyed, its enrichment capability crippled, at least for now. But its most dangerous product, the material itself, might still be out there, sitting quietly in the dark, waiting. Diplomats continue to negotiate. Inspectors continue to request access. Satellites continue to circle overhead, taking picture after picture, hoping one of them finally shows something conclusive. And every few months, a new report surfaces, a new piece of imagery, a new statement from an official trying to describe a situation that refuses to be described with any real confidence. Each report adds detail. None of them adds certainty. And until someone, somewhere, finds a way to answer that question with total certainty, the world remains in exactly the position it's. Satellite image adds a piece. Every inspection report adds a piece. But right now, nobody, absolutely nobody, has. So where does that leave us? Iran's nuclear program, once one of the most advanced and closely watched programs on Earth, now sits in a strange kind of limbo. Its most visible infrastructure destroyed, its enrichment capability crippled, at least for now. But its most dangerous product, the material events, real stakes, explained clearly enough that you actually understand what's happening in the world, not just headlines flying past you. So before you go, like this video if it earned it, subscribe if you want more stories exactly like this one, and share it with someone who deserves to understand the full picture instead of just the headline. Because some questions are too important to stay buried.